Hello, dear friends. You are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is the daily combat summary from the Ukrainian front. But before we begin, by tradition, I would like to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. As you know, with your subscription, you greatly help the development of the channel. And if this is not your first time watching these videos, please subscribe. I would also like to remind our regular viewers that at the end there will be interesting information waiting for those who watch the videos to the very end. Let's start with the news. Zelensky stated that they had received documents, secret documents, showing that Russia is considering taking the Odessa region in the 2026-2027 timeframe. We have previously discussed that the Russian army has plans for Odessa. However, for Russian troops to reach Odessa, they first need to take the entire Kherson region. To do that, they need to cross the Dnieper River, bring in supplies and bring in reserves. After that, it is necessary to take a large part of the Mykolaiv region and only then reach Odessa. What does access to the Odessa region give Russia? It opens up a land corridor to Transnistria. Let me remind you that Russian peacekeepers are stationed there, and they are currently effectively locked in. Furthermore, securing Odessa would be the ultimate strategic victory. It is not just about linking up with Transnistria. It is about completely cutting Ukraine off from the Black Sea. This is their last maritime outlet. If Ukraine becomes a landlocked state, its geopolitical value to its Western backers drops drastically. It would lose its grain export capabilities and whatever remains of its maritime trade, turning it into a total financial burden for the West, with zero chance of economic recovery. This would fundamentally change the entire architecture of Black Sea security, pushing NATO influences far away from Russian coastal interests. But to reach Odessa, considerable effort will be required. So friends, today our video will also be divided into two parts. In the first part, we will discuss the Iranian-American front and what has been happening there over the past 24 hours. And let me tell you, a lot of interesting things have been happening there. Well, in the second part, we will discuss the Russian front, where a lot of interesting things have also occurred. Why is it so important to also monitor the war between the US and Iran? Well, because this war directly affects the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and how it ends will actually mean a great deal for the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Well, listen, just yesterday Trump stated that he does not rule out deploying ground troops to Iran. That is to say, you can see how much things have not gone according to plan for him, and you understand that the longer the states get bogged down there, and the more resources they invest there, the easier it will be for Russia on the Ukrainian front. The United States military-industrial complex is already stretched incredibly thin. Every Patriot missile interceptor fired in the Middle East, every drone deployed, and every artillery shell shipped to the Gulf is equipment that will never reach Kyiv. A two-front global conflict is a logistical nightmare for Washington, and it directly plays into Moscow's hands by fracturing Western attention and financial capabilities. That is why it is so important to keep an eye on what is happening there. Anyway, let's go in order. Yesterday, Iran continued to shell everything it could possibly reach. A strike was launched on Israel, well, naturally. On the city of Beersheba, here is the footage. Well, shelling Israel is expected. Yesterday, there were also arrivals in Tel Aviv, right next to their main and only airport, Ben Gurion. Plus, Hezbollah joined in. So once again, there is a massive brawl between Lebanon and Israel. At the same time, a repeated drone strike was carried out on the British RAF base in Cyprus. They shot down one drone, but the second one smashed into the base. The British started panicking and immediately began evacuating the families of the military stationed there. Ultimately, they evacuated over 1,200 people from the base. Iran continued to hammer the US 5th Fleet Base in Bahrain, and they are pounding this base almost around the clock. Yesterday morning, there was an arrival like this. Everything is covered in smoke, everything is burning, and tonight they continued to hammer it. Hypersonic missiles flew in here. Besides that, what new tactics have we seen from Iran over the past 24 hours? They have started hitting United States embassies. For example, yesterday morning, they attacked the US Embassy in Kuwait. They hit the embassy grounds, a fire started, and the Americans had to evacuate it. Last night, however, they struck the US Embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. They hit it too, a fire broke out, and Trump started throwing a tantrum, threatening Iran with all the wrath of heaven. But in the end, it concluded with the US State Department announcing an evacuation. But in reality, let's call things by their proper names. This is not an evacuation. This is a flight from Jordan, Kuwait, and a number of other countries. Plus, they recommended their citizens immediately leave all these countries. Here is even a list for you. A big list. And you understand what massive damage is currently being done to the economies of the Persian Gulf countries. In addition, Iran continued to strike tankers. Here is footage from one of them. And by the way, importantly, they hit a tanker docked in a port in Bahrain, flying the US flag. That is, they are going all out, hitting embassies, bases, and now they've started striking American tankers. And also, Iran began attacking the King Fahd Causeway. This is the only bridge connecting the island nation of Bahrain with the mainland. It is clear what Iran is trying to do, right? To isolate Bahrain so that it has no connection to the mainland, or at least no road connection. Furthermore, Iran continued to pound the Al Udeid base in Qatar. And this, let me remind you, is the largest US airbase in the region. Satellite images have come in. Take a look. You can see extensive damage to hangars, ammunition depots, command buildings, and radio communication centers. All in all, a lot arrived, and it hit the targets well. Besides that, I think you all know that the US has already lost 3 F-15 fighter jets. They say it was friendly fire. Iran claims they shot down at least 2 of these jets. Well, here, everyone can believe whoever they want. In any case, the fact remains, these fighters are incredibly expensive, costing $170 million each, and the states have already lost 3 of them. But the most important thing that changed in the past 24 hours isn't even the strikes on US embassies or the loss of fighter jets. It's Iran's strikes on oil refineries. For instance, in Saudi Arabia, Iran hit the largest oil refinery in the entire Middle East. Here is the footage. Basically, the refinery burned spectacularly. In addition to the refinery, Iran also struck the production facilities of the largest aluminum company in Bahrain and a key Qatari facility that produces liquefied natural gas. As a result, Qatar completely halted all LNG deliveries. Prices immediately shot up, and in just one day yesterday, the price of gas in Europe jumped by 50%. Can you imagine? In a single day, and this is with just 3 days of war behind us. What happens if the war drags on for a month or 2 months? The Russian budget, by the way, was projected to run a deficit for 2026. The deficit was supposed to be several trillion rubles, tens of billions of dollars. But if the war in the Middle East drags on, there will be no deficit. There will be more money in the budget, which means all problems regarding the funding of the war will disappear. That is why I tell you that this war is highly important for the Russian side in terms of oil revenue, as its outcome partly resolves Russian problems. Well, at least some of them, because sanctions on the Russian oil industry do have a significant impact, and Russia loses tens of billions of dollars from this. Let me expand on this economic reality. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most critical oil choke point. If this conflict escalates into a full blockade of the strait, we are looking at a global economic shockwave. Western economies, still recovering from recent inflationary pressures, will be crushed by skyrocketing fuel prices. This dynamic turns oil into a geostrategic weapon that works entirely in Moscow's favor. While Europe scrambles to find unaffordable energy alternatives, Russia's energy revenues from its Asian partners will multiply, cementing its financial resilience for years to come. Overall, you can see how Iran is acting. They aren't holding back at all. Strikes on embassies, strikes on bases, strikes on American tankers. By the way, yesterday, the US military command also reported 3 fatalities. So at least officially, it is already recognized that 6 American soldiers have died, and this is without a ground operation. And it's understood that official sources always downplay losses, so the Americans clearly have more casualties. And this is just 3 days of war, with no ground invasion. If there is a ground operation, well, it's going to be a fun time there. It seems Trump had a very poor idea of the adventure Netanyahu was dragging him into. It is always easy to enter a war, but it is always very difficult to get out of it. This is shown by Afghanistan, which the Americans couldn't leave for 20 years, and it is shown by the Russian-Ukrainian war. If a war doesn't yield immediate results, getting out of it becomes a very difficult task. Interestingly, by the way, even Trump stated in an interview yesterday that they were shocked by such a response from Iran. They thought Iran wouldn't dare, that American bases were untouchable, American embassies were untouchable, and that Iran would, at most, just strike Israel. Now let's move to the Russian-Ukrainian front. And here we also had good news and very good advances. In the Kharkiv region, fighters from the North Group advanced along a sector more than 5 kilometers wide and established control over the village of Krula. The small bridgehead here is gradually expanding. However, I will also point out that there are no massive operational tempos here, and there won't be. That is, the Russian army will now push to squeeze Nesterna, and I think they will move along the border to connect with the Vovchansk bridgehead. Much more important news came from the Lyman direction. It was reported here that the urban-type settlement of Drobyshev has come under Russian control. And it wasn't just a claim, there was objective visual confirmation footage from the center of Drobyshev. But this is still a very difficult sector, so I think we need to wait for additional confirmation that they really managed to secure the settlement. Because, for example, there was no objective control footage from this specific adjacent area. So for now, we keep a question mark in mind. But if they really knocked the Ukrainian Armed Forces, AFU, out of Drobyshev, this is very, very good news, as it opens the way to Lyman. True, there is a forest here, and everything inside is dug up and entrenched, so advancing easily won't be possible. Nevertheless, it still leaves only 2.5 kilometers to the residential areas of Lyman, and thus there is a good chance that within the 3 spring months we will finish the job, and by June Lyman will be under Russian control. Taking Lyman is a massive operational prize. It is a vital railway and logistics hub. Once Russian forces fully secure this territory, the entire defensive architecture of the AFU in the northern Donbass will begin to crumble. We also must consider the seasonal factors. The spring mud season, the Rasputitsa, is setting in, making off-road movement for heavy Western-supplied armor nearly impossible. Under these conditions, the Russian advantage in artillery and glide bombs becomes even more absolute, systematically dismantling enemy strongholds while limiting our own infantry casualties. Additionally, very good news came from the Sloviansk direction. Here, fighters of the South Group advanced by 4 kilometers and finished clearing Reznikivka, reaching the approaches to Kaliniki. And after Kaliniki, it's just Ry-Oleksandrivka. Plus, there is now also the opportunity to press Kryvyi Luki from the south. In general, the AFU's Sloviansk direction continues to collapse, and for now they can do absolutely nothing about it. There are really good chances now that they've secured Reznikivka. Good chances that by the end of the month, Ry-Oleksandrivka will already be under Russian control, which means that by April, Russian troops will be just 2.5 kilometers from the outskirts of the city of Mykolaiivka. And let's move with you to the Dobropilya direction. News is coming in here. There are changes. There are changes in the area of the settlement of Molodetska. But this is most likely not the Dobropilya direction, but the Mazhova direction, as Russian troops are currently expanding their zone of control toward the settlement of Medjova. Earlier, video materials were obtained. Videos repeatedly came from here, showing Ukrainian military counterattacking from the direction of Molodetska towards Udakne. Udakne was and remains under full Russian control. Molodetska was in a contested grey zone. Russian troops were taking it under full control and were also securing positions in Novopidhorodne. However, the fate of the assault troops who entrenched themselves in Novopidhorodne is unknown. Either they withdrew from the settlement or they are still on the outskirts. This information is not exactly known right now, but what was known is that Ukrainian troops south of Molodetska were moving toward Udakne. Also, some sources wrote that Ukrainian forces were moving from Molodetska, and perhaps Molodetska was in the grey zone. Today we managed to find information that Russian troops have taken this entire territory under their control. The entire area marked in red has today passed under the full control of the Russians, and Russian troops are expanding their zone of control toward the settlement of Mazhova. This settlement is one of the key points on this sector of the front line, as logistics run through it towards Novopavlivka, directly toward Novopidhorodne, and it also connects to the supply road leading to Pokrovsk. So, for today, these are the changes here. Let's move further along the map to the Huliaipole direction. News and updates are coming from the Huliaipole direction. The changes concern the Zaliznikny area. From this combat sector, I managed to find information that Russian troops have cleared this entire area. This whole territory is now under the full control of the Russian armed forces. We previously assumed that Russian troops would level the front line along the railway. It runs exactly like this, and Russian forces are currently straightening the front line along this railway. The entire territory marked in red has been cleared as of today. Also, this territory was cleared earlier. Russian fighters came under AFU fire here, which leads us to conclude that the front line, perhaps even at the time of recording this video, has already been leveled and is under Russian control. There are also reports that Russian troops are expanding their control zone around the settlement of Hirka. There is also information that they are expanding their control zone in the area of Starukrainka. Apparently, they are expanding the zone to the west of this settlement. And the settlements of Vozdvizhivka, Verkhnya Tersa are under attack, and combat operations are even ongoing in the vicinity of Rizdvianka. We mentioned earlier that Rizdvianka had passed under Russian control, and finally more good news came from the Zaporizhzhia direction. Here, fighters from the Dnieper group have successfully pushed through Primorske, reaching the approaches to Richna. Why is this important? Because now it is only 10 kilometers to the administrative borders of the city of Zaporizhzhia. This advance is highly symbolic and militarily devastating for Kiev. This was the very sector where the highly publicized Ukrainian counter-offensive bled out and stalled last year. The fact that Russian forces are now systematically chewing through these deeply echeloned fortifications proves a fundamental shift in battlefield momentum. The use of heavy aviation, particularly FAB glide bombs equipped with precision guidance modules, is physically erasing the concrete bunkers the AFU spent months building. They have no answer to this tactic. To summarize the past 24 hours overall, 4 settlements and 37 square kilometers of territory passed under Russian control. Well, I must tell you, this is a very impactful start to spring. We are witnessing a massive geopolitical shift playing out in real time across multiple continents. The days of Western hegemony dictating military outcomes are over. Thank you to everyone who supports this channel through likes, comments, and subscriptions. Your engagement helps push these videos through the algorithm, allowing more people to see the objective reality of the front lines. Thank you all for watching. That's the news I have for today. Until next time.